Have you ever wondered how the city of Rochester came to be? Where did it come from? Maybe it wasn't exactly what we thought it was when it started, but it became there. What drove it? We're going to be learning all about that on today's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report, which as always is brought to you by...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard. The Mendon Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Hey there, and welcome everyone to today's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm Chris Carosa. With me today is Christine Ridarsky. She is the city historian for the city of Rochester and other things. Christine, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get to where you are today?
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's been a long road, I think. I grew up in Ohio, and I was very fortunate to know several of my great-grandparents, and I was actually very close with my maternal great-grandmother. So I grew up hearing all of these stories about her childhood and stories about her working in downtown Youngstown, Ohio. And I think my grandmother was a bit of a flapper, so that always intrigued me too. And, I ended up in Rochester, coming here as a journalist. I worked at the Democrat and Chronicle in Rochester. But, I was always interested in that history and getting back and learning more about history. And so I ended up going back to school, got a master's degree in history from SUNY Brockport, and had the opportunity during my studies there to do some internships where I learned about the idea of public history. And as someone who had worked in journalism and really believed in the idea of public service, the idea of doing history that was aimed at a public audience rather than an academic audience really appealed to me. And so from there, I went on and started to pursue a PhD at the University of Rochester. And while I was doing that, and just after my daughter was born, I had this wonderful opportunity to become the city historian for Rochester, New York. And that just ticked all of my boxes. I've just always wanted to be in public service. And this is a way that I can combine that love for community with my love for history.
So tell us a little bit about what is entailed by being the historian for the city of Rochester. Who tells you what to do, and who do you present what the work is to? Who's your audience, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Chris. I think I don't know if your audience knows, that New York State has this strange law that was passed in 1919 that requires that every municipality in New York State must have an appointed historian. So as Rochester's appointed government historian, I'm appointed by our mayor. I'm actually serving my fourth mayor right now. And I am an appointed government official. And my responsibility is to study our history, and most importantly, share the knowledge of that history, and to help our community to protect historical records and artifacts that tell our community's history. So I report to a whole lot of people, actually, but most significantly, I report to the mayor. I advise when asked on various city projects. I also, serve our community. So constituents can call me up and, ask for information about our history, and I will provide what information I can and direct them to resources. I also partner closely with other institutions in the community. Actually, the Rochester Museum and Science Center here in Rochester originally was established as a municipal museum. And so many of the things in their collections actually still belong to the city of Rochester. So I actually have a role on their collections committee too, helping to steward those collections.
So tell us a little bit about the city of Rochester itself and its beginnings. It wasn't really the first quote unquote city. Wasn't there like a Tyron or something, Tryon, something like that?
Yeah,
Go ahead, tell us about that.
yeah, what is today Rochester actually is made up of several different villages that had been established in the community. So when I point to what's today the city of Rochester, the oldest portion of that would be what is considered the neighborhood of Charlotte, which is a community that is right up on Lake Ontario. And that was settled in 1797, I believe. And then we had numerous other pockets. So the first permanent settler in what we consider to be downtown Rochester came in 1812. And the village of Rochesterville was officially established in 1817. But there were all these competing communities around just in this general vicinity. A few years later, some of those villages started to merge. And by 1834, we had grown large enough to actually be classified as a city. But keep that in mind, that's only a 17-year period. And we were this boom town. We were the fastest growing community in the nation during those early years.
What was responsible for that? Why did people all of a sudden have this interest in Rochester? What did Rochester provide that everyone wanted?
Yeah, the first thing that drew people to Rochester was our river, our water power. I was just talking to you earlier about the noise. I don't know if you're able to hear it, but I sit right on the Genesee River. I can look out my window every day and watch the river and the herons in the river. So, that's a good reminder to me every day about the significance of the Genesee River and the river's ability to provide water power for our community. So people were first drawn here for that water power, and people quickly began to build raceways so that they could build mills and power the mills to create products like timber and flour. And with that potential, we also were very fortunate when in 1817, New York State decided to route the Erie Canal through what would become the center of Rochester. And so I always say it's those two waterways that really made Rochester the boom town that it would become.
So somewhere there's a joke in there, like a "water you up to," and well, whatever. So let's talk about another hat that you've worn. Most recently, you've been president of the Association of Public Historians of New York State. Tell us about that group. Just tell us about that group first, then we'll dive a little bit deeper into that subject.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for this opportunity. I came in as president of that organization at the beginning of 2020 and served for 3 years. And of course, it was a very challenging period. But the Association of Public Historians of New York State represents the state's 600 plus historians. So as I mentioned, every community should have a historian, and the Association of Public Historians, or AFNIs, as we call ourselves for short, is here to serve as the professional organization for all of our state's historians. So the main thing that we do is we have an annual conference, a statewide conference where we all come together to network with each other, learn what we're doing, but we also offer incredible training opportunities for our members so they can learn about the techniques that other people are using in their own communities to do history, get ideas from each other. So that's very helpful. And then we also offer regional regional meetings in the spring in each of our 12 regions in the community. So, it really is all about learning and finding the best ways that we can serve the public in this role and teach more people about New York State's incredible history.
Are there opportunities through that group for public historians in different municipalities to work collaboratively or to develop projects that, say, for example, would meet the curriculum requirements of 4th and 7th grade in New York State?
Absolutely. And we've been doing a lot of that. So, speaking of collaboration, one of the things we've been able to do is we've established a very strong partnership with the William G. Pomeroy Foundation out of Syracuse, New York. The Pomeroy Foundation has been very helpful in providing funding to allow us to erect historic markers throughout New York State. Those are those roadside markers, most of them are blue and yellow, that you see as just as a means of making people aware, making them think about the history that has happened in their communities. And so AFNIS has worked on numerous projects with the Pomeroy Foundation to document existing markers and to erect new markers throughout the state. As far as curriculum, many of our members have also been involved with the New York State Archives Partnership Trust new project, Consider the Source New York, which is an educational website that many of us have been contributing to. The goal of that project is to get more primary source documents available online for use in K through 12 classes. Mostly 4th grade is where they speak mostly about New York State history. And so many of our members are serving on focus groups and leading some of those efforts throughout New York State to get those documents available and then to help find teachers who are helping to write curriculum about those things. And many of us also are going into classrooms on a regular basis and working with students.
Right. So there's another project that's coming up for the group dealing with the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Maybe what people can expect their local historians to do with regards to that project?
Yes, thank you for asking me that, Chris, because that is the big focus right now. I've actually been part of a statewide focus group, a working group that's been trying to learn, trying to figure out the best ways for New York State to commemorate the anniversary. And we're looking at not just the Declaration of Independence, but the whole revolutionary period up through the adoption of the Constitution. So communities throughout New York State are already planning what they're going to do. And, this is a topic that is very easy for people working in places where battles took place, for example. But the goal of New York State's anniversary commemoration is really about looking at revolutionary ideas and ideals so that communities throughout New York State are being asked to participate in this. So here in Rochester, for example, we are the home of Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony. So, they were involved in revolutionary movements, reform movements that took place well after the actual Revolutionary War period, but those ideals connect back to the Revolution and the Constitution. And so we're looking for ways throughout New York State to commemorate the role of the Revolution and the idea of the continuing revolution, that we are still today trying to achieve some of the ideals of the Declaration and of the Constitution. So we hope that you will see commemorations of this revolutionary period throughout New York State, whether a battle took place in your community or not. There are things we can connect you to. And AFNIS is helping with that by partnering with the New York State historian Devin Landers and other organizations throughout the state to issue a guide to the American Revolution celebrations. So nationwide, there have been a couple guides put out to help people think about how they can commemorate this. In New York State, you will see that happening here as well. And we hope to get that out in the next few weeks.
All right. Thanks. And, the thing about the Women's Seneca Falls Conference, they actually borrowed language from the Declaration of Independence. So it does tie in very directly to the revolutionary ideas that you state. We'll be right back after this message to talk more about other bicentennial celebrations that have come up and will be coming up. Stay tuned.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
We have a question that came in from the audience about how do they contact or find out about their local public historian? What's the best way for them to do that?
That's a great question. AFNI's actually keeps a list of historians on its website. So that is aphnys.org. So you can go there to look that up. You also can call your town hall or your village hall and ask for that. You know, unfortunately, the law in New York State is not always adhered to in the way it should be. So you should have a historian in your municipality, but you may not. We do know of municipalities that have not appointed historians. Monroe County is actually really good. I believe most of our communities have appointed historians. So it really varies on the where you live. But if you don't know your historian, or if you don't have a historian, I would encourage you to contact your town or village city hall.
A related question, which they didn't ask, but they probably are thinking in the background, is what's the difference between a public historian and a municipal or local historical society?
Oh, that's a great idea. And I'm also going to talk about the language you're using, Chris, because you're referring to public historians. And I am actually a government appointed historian, which is a form of public historian, but we actually use the word public historian much more broadly as well. So a public historian really is anyone who is doing their work primarily for a public audience, as opposed to an academic or educational audience. So people working in historical societies and museums are public historians as well. And the Association of Public Historians of New York State invites all of them to become affiliate members. So to become a full member of the organization, you have to be an officially appointed government historian, but we do have affiliate categories, and we encourage anyone working in the field of public history to work together, because we all are working toward the same purpose, which is educating and informing our local communities about our local history and our state history. So so the difference, and it's a good point to know, is that a government appointed historian is actually a government official. We take an oath of office. We're required to adhere by freedom of information laws, public officers laws, all of those things. And we are not necessarily collecting materials. We generally, most of us will have small collections of historical materials in our office, but usually they are things that were created through the processes of our own work. But if you have materials to donate, you're probably not going to be donating them to your municipal historian, because then they become owned by the government, and that's not necessarily the government's primary role. So we'd rather help you get materials into a historical society, a museum, a library, where their full job is to care for those materials.
Excellent. So let's turn now, speaking of history, let's talk about Monroe County. Monroe County has its bicentennial, or had it, a couple of years ago during the pandemic. It was really hard to celebrate when everyone was stuck in their homes. But they did do something last year. Can you just give us an idea of what they did and maybe how people could partake of it still?
Yeah, it was really unfortunate because Monroe County was all set to celebrate its bicentennial in 2021. And then, of course, COVID came along and the planning was really interrupted. Certainly, our officials here had much more pressing issues to deal with. But, we didn't forget about it. And because our actual anniversary is late in the year, we actually continued the celebration into 2022. And so our county executive, Adam Bello, was very supportive of the idea. He's a big fan of history. And so he wanted to ensure that they didn't allow that to go by without being marked in some way. And so the celebration was much more muted than we would have hoped. But, there were activities around the community, displays in different towns and libraries and things like that. There were some projects aimed that are actually all of our town historians were involved in, trying to tell history through individual artifacts from their communities. So, we had hoped to do more. But we're working on some other things too. Another thing that we did during the anniversary years was we actually renamed our airport. So we are now, our airport is known as the Frederick Douglass, the Greater Rochester Frederick Douglass International Airport. So we named our airport for one of our greatest historical figures.
I didn't realize that was part of the bicentennial thing. That's pretty cool.
We have been working on it for a long time leading up to that, and the official renaming actually happened before it. And there's still work going on, but it's all connected.
Wow! So let's talk about an upcoming bicentennial that impacts not just the city of Rochester, as you alluded to earlier, but the entire northern tier of the Greater Western New York region, and that is the Erie Canal. It's on. What is it? 26, is that the bicentennial year?
25 was
25.
The official opening of the canal. Although, here in Rochester, we talk about it a little early because our section of the canal actually opened several years before then. So you were able to go small distances out of Rochester 2 to 3 years before the full canal opened.
That's right. Well, how is this celebration occurring? Because it's such a long stretch of land. Are all these communities together, coming together to do something, or are they each doing their individual thing?
It's a little of both. A lot of us are connected up with the Canal Corporation and with the Canal Society of New York. There's also the Erie Canal National Heritage Corridor. So those larger organizations are coordinating a lot of activities, and then local communities are doing their own thing too. So here in Rochester, we don't have a single plan in place yet. But, how can you not mark it, right? For me, sitting here in downtown Rochester, I actually, that window I overlook over the river, I also overlook the Erie Canal Aqueduct, which over the years was layered. So there was a second layer put onto it after the Erie Canal left downtown Rochester. And we had a subway running in that. And there's a road deck that's on the top of that now. So, out my window every day, I see this reminder of this rich history of the Erie Canal. And, it's so exciting to see that happening. So, once the Erie Canal left downtown Rochester, it was replaced by the barge canal, and they changed the route, and they canalized part of the Genesee River. So, part of the Genesee River is now actually part of the barge canal, which replaced the Erie Canal. So, really you can't look anywhere in the city of Rochester and not see some remnants of the canal system. And I think that's true in any community that the canal went through. And it's not just on the water. I mentioned earlier how important the Erie Canal was to the growth of Rochester. As soon as the route for the Erie Canal was announced in 1817, our population here in Rochester started doubling every year. At least doubling. In some cases, it doubled, it tripled, or more. It was crazy, and that's why Rochester is known as the first boom town. So, that encouraged boat builders to grow up in Rochester. It resulted in flour mills, brewing industry, flour and seed industries. At one time, the King of England is said to have only used Rochester flour for her cakes because our flour was considered best in the world. That was only possible because of the Erie Canal. And you can hear stories like that throughout New York State, wherever the canal passes through. So for us, the Erie Canal Bicentennial, it's just a way of marking everything that's significant about our history. You can tie it to so much. You can tie it to Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass, too, because the canal brought reformers and reform ideas to the community.
That's right. Well, go back the burnt over district. That was Western New York because of the canal.
Exactly.
I guess I'm wondering, is there going to be a 200th or a bicentennial celebration for the first railroad in New York? Or maybe not the first railroad, but the reason why the year 1826 came into my mind, that was the year that they started building what ended up being the New York Central to actually replace a portion of the canal or compete with a portion of the canal outside of Albany. So I just thought that would be something to start celebrating at some point. I don't even know what a good year to pick would be.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And isn't that always the problem, right? What year do you pick on a project as big as the Erie Canal or the railroad system? So I have not personally heard of any plans to commemorate railroad construction of any sort, but I know we have a number of enthusiasm groups. We have the New York State Transportation Society here in our area. I would bet you that somebody somewhere is planning some sort of celebration.
That would make sense. So we got a couple minutes to go. Just is there anything up and coming on your plate that you want to share with the audience?
Oh, there is just so much up and coming. Rochester is in this wonderful state right now where we've been engaged in planning for development and improvement of our waterfront in Rochester. This has been in the planning phases for several years now. We've already seen several projects that have helped improve access to our waterfront. There was a point in time when you could live in Rochester and you would walk down Main Street across the Genesee River and would not even know there was a river there. We actually had buildings built on our bridge across our river. So, we overlooked the river for so long. It was seen only as an industrial tool, basically. So today we're recognizing that, waterfronts like ours draw tourists. They're, boaters and nature enthusiasts. There's so much we can do with this beautiful waterfront that we have. And the community has really rallied around this idea of increasing access. And so you see, right outside my window, there's a lot of plans to do something creative with the old Erie Canal Aqueduct and create places where people can come and experience the waterways. There are plans for a new state park in our High Falls district so that people will be able, right in downtown Rochester, to actually get down to the river level. Because if you're familiar with Rochester, you know that in much of the community, the river is within a gorge, so it's not necessarily easy to get right down to river level. This new state park will allow that. And I just learned recently, Cornhill Navigation is an organization here whose mission is to educate people about the Genesee River and the Erie Canal. And they've run a boat out of Pittsford, one of our small communities to the east of here. and they are this year bringing a boat downtown. So we will have a tourism and educational vessel that leaves right from downtown Rochester on the Genesee River and the Erie Canal. So there's so much happening here right now that is history oriented, but future oriented as well.
Excellent. Well, Christine, thank you very much for being a part of today's show. Thank you, everyone who's watching, for being a part of today's live audience. Remember, if you want to be a member of the live audience, it's the only way that you can ask a question to our guests live while the guest is on the air. Sign up to our site. It's stateof.greaterwesternewyork.com. It's free to register, and every Thursday morning, you'll get an email that tells you how to link into the studio so you can watch it live and ask our guests any sort of questions that you might have. Otherwise, you can watch this on our website, stateof.greaterwesternewyork.com. All of our shows are archived there, and every Sunday, we rebroadcast this on our Facebook page or YouTube channel. If you like the page, you will be notified when it airs at 1:30. Same thing, if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you'll also be notified when it airs at 1:30 on Sunday. Christine, I'll just ask you to stick around through the end. Other than that, thanks for being here, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks.